What's going on, you guys? TBR here, back yet again with another video. In today's video, we are going to be doing another movie review. This time we are going to be taking a look at Netflix's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But before we get into all of that, make sure if you guys haven't already done so, you smash that like button and subscribe. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the review of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Alright, you guys, so usual disclaimers apply here. We are going to be getting into spoilers and talking about pretty much all the major plot points of the film in this review. So if you guys are not into that sort of thing or do not like spoilers, make sure that you go ahead and watch the film first and then go ahead and come on back and we can talk about it. But before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about the setup and the plot of the film, and then we'll get into the review. Netflix's Texas Chainsaw Massacre takes place nearly 50 years after the events of the original film, serving as a sequel of sorts to Tobe Hooper's original 1974 horror classic, and is the 9th film in the franchise's history. This time we follow the entrepreneurs Melody and Dante, who along with Melody's sister Lila and Dante's girlfriend Ruth, travel to the ghost town known as Harlow in hopes of auctioning off the various properties in the area in order to gentrify it. The group runs into an altercation with the old woman still living in the orphanage they claim to have the deed to, and when she suffers a fatal heart attack, that's when Leatherface decides to take things into his own bloody hands. Now, of course, I do have to mention that Sally Hardesty, the survivor and final girl of the original film, does make her return with this film. Unfortunately, however, Marilyn Burns, who played Sally in the original film, has since passed away, and so therefore they do recast her for the purposes of including the character in this film, which does explain, in my opinion, a lot of the decisions that were made with her character, but we'll talk about it. So right off the bat, what I want to start off with is the things that I found that this film did well. The first thing that this film has to nail, if it's even going to be halfway decent, of course, is Leatherface, and I'm happy to report that, in my opinion, this is probably the creepiest and coolest Leatherface we've gotten since the original film. This character is a bloodthirsty killing machine, and I will tell you guys what, I did not expect this movie to be halfway decent. However, I really do feel like, because of the broad shoulders of the big boy himself, that this film actually is pretty decent, even if he does have to be the one to carry it. Now, of course, that isn't to say that some of the characters aren't good. There are actually several character moments in this film that are actually really decent and actually lend a lot of heart to some of the characters, particularly the sisters. I found their dynamic and just their characters in general to be really likable and actually really grounded and interesting for the most part. Now, the little sister is actually the survivor of a school shooting, and that's kind of something she's struggling with throughout the film, and you see this via flashbacks and, you know, PTSD moments and things like that with her that are really interesting as far as layering her character, and definitely do a lot to lend a lot of emotion towards the two of them. And I do feel like if there are strong characters to be had in this film outside of Leatherface, that the two sisters are definitely those, which is a really good thing considering the fact that really they don't do a lot to build anybody else in the film, and those two girls are considered to be kind of the main characters of the film. So that's kind of something that you really needed to happen if this film was going to have any chance at all. Now, when it comes to Leatherface, though, he is extremely intense, and a lot of that has to do with what they did with the script. This movie in general has a lot of moments that are just high intensity. Now, I'm talking really, really high tension, and not that high tension. This movie does a lot to set up certain situations, especially playing with the chainsaw itself, to make it just that much creepier and that much more of a butthole clenching moment whenever those moments arise, to the point where, honestly, I would say that this is one of the more intense slasher films that we've seen in a very long time. And as far as building tension, they do a really good job. When it comes to the gore is absolutely filthy in this movie, and I'm also happy to say that not all of it is CGI. They do use CGI in certain moments of the film, but it never feels like it's so much that it completely takes you out of the scene. In fact, there are certain moments of practical effects in this film that look really cool, and honestly, they never really shy away from the gore either. So even when you have a bus full of people who were there in the town of Harlow in order to buy the property at auction, stuck between the exit door and Leatherface, yeah, you begin to realize that not only is the body count really high in this film, but the gore is something that they never really ever shy away from, and instead they seem to embellish it. And that is something that's actually kind of a welcome surprise with this movie. A lot of times anymore in slasher movies, they try to get a little artsy-fartsy with it. They try to kind of shy away. And this movie really doesn't do that. This movie instead really just gets in there. You see close-ups of certain things at certain points that you probably never even wanted to see in the first place. And to be honest with you guys, there are some moments of gore in this movie that are really, really cool. So in general, if you're somebody that's there for the gore, this movie is going to be a lot of fun for you. Like I said, there's a ton of moments where you're going to be left going, ew. But at the same time, if you're a horror fan, that is something that we definitely learn to respect and to value at this point, especially considering we have movies like that new Resident Evil movie we just talked about that not only shy away from a lot of the gore, but a lot of it is just purely CGI. So that is something that this film does really, really well, in my opinion, and I was really happy to see that. And you also, of course, have the chainsaw doing a lot of the work. You guys will be happy to see that if you're a big Texas Chainsaw fan. So in general, I feel like as far as the core elements of the film, being Leatherface and the main protagonists, those things all worked. However, this movie has problems. So the first big problem with the movie, in my opinion, is going to have to start with the character of Sally. Now, yes, Marilyn Burns, as I mentioned, has passed away, so unfortunately, they couldn't get her for this film. However, if that is going to be the case, in my opinion, just don't touch the character, just leave it alone. Now, of course, they decided to have the character in this film. I guess it was trying to be some sort of passing of the torch moment, and that never really worked, especially considering the fact that while the woman that they chose to play Sally in this film definitely did not do a bad job, she didn't necessarily have a whole lot to do, and so it almost felt like the only time she really showed up was to have a couple of lines here or there, to look real like angry and solemn, and then to stare at a photograph of the cast of the original film and name them off here and there. So honestly, her scenes in the film were some of the worst for me, and that's kind of unfortunate when you consider the fact that she is kind of a hallowed ground character and definitely going to be the main female protagonist of the entire franchise at this point. If there is one of those to be had, she's at least the one that comes to mind. She's the most iconic, and therefore I feel like they really could have done more respect to the character in this film. So that is going to be the main reason I'm going to dock this film points at the end of this. But really, honestly, there are just some dumb scenes with her too. Like, spoiler alert, again, spoilers in this film, they do kill her character off, and she really doesn't have much of a send-off, to be honest. In fact, what ends up happening is she ends up getting impaled on the chainsaw, and, you know, Leatherface has her raised over his head, and she's, you know, hanging on his chainsaw, and they tosses her into an alley or into a pile of trash next to an alley. And she ends up somehow surviving that. Yeah. Now, she ends up dying, like I said, but not from that, not right away. So she ends up getting a shot in on him in order to save one of the sisters who is being chased through the street by him, which is a really tense scene again, very tense scenes in this movie. And yeah, then she ends up kicking the bucket after that, right? So it ends up being kind of this baton pass moment where, you know, she leaves her shotgun laying next to her for the young girl to grab. And, you know, it is what it is. Like I said, if Marilyn Burns is not available for the film because of course she has passed away, then if you're not going to leave the character out, I guess killing off the character is the most respectful thing to do after that, because at that point, you know, you can't bring Marilyn back. You can't really do much with the character at this point if that's going to be the case. In my opinion, you just want to leave it alone. So at that point, I guess that makes sense. If you're going to bring her back, you just kind of let her go. So that's one thing, and that definitely drives down, in my opinion, how good this movie could have been. However, that being said, we have to talk about a few of the plot holes. So there are plot holes aplenty in this movie. This is, like I said, not going to be an Oscar-winning film by any stretch of the imagination. You have some definite things where you have to take kind of a even more bigger leap of logic in order to believe certain things, and I get it, my suspension of disbelief is, you know, much higher than most people, but if you're somebody going into this movie expecting a coherent plot, you're not going to get that. So that is not something this film does well. There's plenty of issues with it. It definitely has some plot convenience going on, and in general, it's got a lot of problems. But I will say, there are also going to be moments in this film that I feel like are very memorable. So there are several different scenes in this movie, like I said, going back to the intensity, that really drive this movie home for me and make it a film that is definitely not worth just shredding all over the place, right? So one scene in particular is one that takes place inside of a vehicle, and Leatherface is basically carving off the face of his mother so he can wear it as his mask throughout the film. Yes, the mask that he wears is his mother's face. And so basically you see the young woman sitting in the front seat of the vehicle that has crashed, who's still a little bit dazed and out of it, watching him do this through the rear view window. And then you kind of see the whole scene play itself out where he's behind the vehicle, she's in the front seat, she can't get out, she's trying to get away, and there's this definite feeling of dread throughout the whole thing that works really, really well. There's also another scene that takes place underneath a bed in a bedroom where you have one of the sisters hiding under the bed. I believe it's Melody. She's hiding under the bed, and Leatherface is breaking down the wall next to the bed in order to pull out his chainsaw, which he has hidden back there. So you have this scene where you have kind of the debris falling in front of her to the floor as he's doing this, but at the same time you have another side character who's inside the house kind of searching for her with a gun, going after Leatherface after he's gotten the chainsaw, and it ends up spiraling into this really tense scene that's really fun to watch and ends up culminating in an awesome kill that is extremely violent. So in general, this film does a lot of that really, really well. And I feel like it also has a really good ending as well. So the movie ends up ending, spoiler alert again, but the movie ends up ending with the girls having overtaken Leatherface. You know, you had the two girls kind of team up to take him down, and then they end up getting into, this ends up being, it devolves into the world's worst kind of commercial for an electric vehicle at this point, or self-driving vehicle, whatever it ended up being. But they get done with killing Leatherface, and you'd think by now if they'd have ever watched a Scream movie, they'd know that you always double tap, but...
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
But hey, who am I to judge? So they end up going back to the car, they program it to go home, they set it to go home, it starts driving home, and then of course Leatherface comes running up to the passenger side of the vehicle, grabs Melody out of the vehicle. As the car continues to drive forward, you have the other sister go up through the sunroof, looking back as he beheads her right in front of her and starts swinging his chainsaw and the severed head around in the street, and she's screaming, driving away in the self-driving car. Like I said, it's the world's worst commercial for a self-driving car, but it was pretty hilarious also because you saw it coming a mile away, and it was fun. So in general, it's a fun movie. The characters, like I said, are mostly forgettable outside of the sisters and Leatherface, and I guess Sally, just because of the lineage there behind the character. But even then, like I said, they don't really do a whole lot with her in the film, so you know, it is what it is, unfortunately. So in general though, I do think that this movie at the end of the day is not a terrible film. It's decent, you know, it's definitely got some moments, like I said, there are some genuinely kind of creepy moments. There's even, like I said, some heartfelt moments. There's one scene in particular where Melody is stuck inside of one of the vehicles, kind of back. The movie takes place in a lot of vehicles, I find. Now that I think about it, almost all the memorable scenes are in a vehicle. Weird. But anyway, we have Melody stuck in the front seat of a vehicle because her leg has been pinned by some rebar or some sort of pipe, and she cannot get out. She's basically told her sister, just leave, I'm gonna die, you need to go, which is a really nice, tender moment for the two of them. Like I said, the two of them are actually pretty good little characters for the most part. So Leatherface has pretty much been stalking them up to this point, and he's almost there. She tells her that she needs to go. I'm going to die, but you can live. Go, leave me. And she ends up leaving her, and Leatherface walks up to the passenger window and ends up looking at her. She looks at him with tears in her eyes and tells him she apologizes for what happened to his mother, that shouldn't have happened, and that she regrets it, and blah blah blah, which is actually a really cool little scene. It doesn't feel like she's pleading with him. It feels like she actually genuinely is upset with what happened and how it happened, which we saw throughout the film unfold as well, which was kind of part of her character arc. So it actually does a good job of building those types of things, but then it goes right back into the tension as they do a really fun effect where things start to vibrate on the screen and he starts to rev his chainsaw and lift it up and it starts to come back into frame, and it's a really cool little scene. So in general, there are a lot of scenes in this movie that work, that are just really, really memorable, really, really fun. And at the end of the day, I feel like that's what this movie is. It's a fun movie. It's not going to win any awards. It's not going to give you everything as a Texas Chainsaw fan you would want or enjoy out of a sequel. However, I do feel like it is definitely a strong installment into the franchise, which at this point has been for strong installments. And in the end, I think it almost hits the landing. I would have loved to have seen more with Sally. I would have loved if they either would have just left her out and done something entirely different, or at least kept her around for some big memorable moment. But instead, what we get, her most memorable scene is a scene where she wants Leatherface, she has him cornered with a shotgun, wants him to say her name, wants him to acknowledge that he knows and remembers her friends. And of course, Leatherface is a mindless monster who's just a killing machine at this point, so he doesn't care. In fact, what does he do? He just grabs his chainsaw and walks away. He doesn't even deem her important enough to kill her at that point. So that's really kind of indicative of her character in the film. She has every chance in the world to kill him in that moment. Instead, she wants to sit there and, have a conversation with someone who up to this point we kind of established he's not much of a talker. So yeah, her character is completely just in this movie. So that's the biggest downfall of the film. The plot holes are another one. There's tons of story beats that don't work in this movie and or just don't get kind of followed through on. But anyway, that being said, the film, not terrible. I'm feeling an easy 3 out of this one. Could maybe go 2.5, 3, somewhere in there. I think this is a movie that's definitely worth the watch if you're a fan of the franchise. I don't think it should insult you directly. I don't think this is something that's going to leave just a horrible taste in your mouth if you're going into it expecting nothing special and just expecting some good, fun, intense scenes of gore. If you're looking for some more heartfelt moments with some of the characters as well in your slasher film, this has got that as well. Just understand that it is going to disrespect a little bit of the lineage and the heritage behind the character of Sally, and it isn't necessarily going to give you a whole lot if you're a big fan of her character, and there are going to be some massive plot holes here and there that leave you going, well, what? Yeah, so anyway, you guys, that is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What did you guys think of the movie? If you've seen it, let me know in the comments section down below. As always, I appreciate all of you who watched this video. If you enjoyed it, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.
Continue.